The shuttle carrying Ambassador Elena Vasquez broke through the golden clouds that surrounded the council station, and she pressed her face against the cold window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The station itself was a miracle of engineering that made her heart ache with wonder and envy. A crystalline dome the size of a small moon that orbited a neutron star, its surfaces catching the strange light and throwing rainbows across the void of space. She had trained for 15 years for this moment, learned 12 alien languages, studied the customs of species that had walked among the stars when humanity still lived in caves. And now she would speak for all of Earth before the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy, her aide. A young man named Thomas Chun stood beside her with a tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. "Ambassador, the Council has granted us exactly 12 minutes to make our case," he said, his voice tight with nerves. "And the HFY High Speaker has already made public statements calling our petition a waste of time." Elena smoothed the front of her formal uniform, the deep blue fabric chosen to represent Earth's oceans, the golden trim meant to symbolize human hope and ambition. "Then we will make every second count," she replied. Though her stomach churned with anxiety, she refused to show the shuttle docked with barely a whisper of contact, and the airlock cycled open to reveal a corridor of living crystal that seemed to breathe with soft pulses of light. 2 Murthani guards waited for them, massive creatures that resembled bears crossed with armored tanks, their 4 eyes watching the humans with expressions that might have been boredom or contempt. Elena walked between them with her head held high, refusing to be intimidated by beings that stood 3 meters tall and could crush her skull with a casual swipe of their clawed hands. The corridor opened into the grand chamber, and despite all her preparation, Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. The room was vast beyond comprehension, a sphere of transparent crystal that seemed to hang in the heart of the neutron star's radiation, filled with floating platforms where representatives of the 12 ruling species sat in judgment. The HFY occupied the highest platform, insectoid beings wrapped in ceremonial silks that were older than human civilization, their compound eyes glittering with intelligence that had guided their empire for 50,000 years. Below them floated the Zorani, beings of pure bioluminescence whose bodies shifted through colors but conveyed emotions no human could fully understand. Murthani delegation rumbled on their platform, the same species as the guards, their military decorations speaking of countless conquests and victories. And there were 9 others, each species ancient and powerful, each one watching the lone human woman who dared to stand before them and ask for recognition. Elena stepped onto the petitioner's platform, a small disk of crystal that rose to the center of the chamber, and she felt very small and very alone. "I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Federation," she began, her voice amplified by technology she could not see. "And I come before this council to request membership in the galactic community." The HFY High Speaker, a being called Kethrix, whose title had been held by his genetic line for 3,000 years, leaned forward on his platform. "The human speaks," he said, and his translator rendered his words with a tone of amused surprise. How novel! Soft sounds of amusement rippled through the chamber, and Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression calm. "Earth has achieved faster than light travel," she continued. "We have established colonies in 17 star systems. We have developed sustainable fusion technology, and we have come in peace to offer our friendship and our trade to the great civilizations of the galaxy." 17 systems, the Zorani representative said, their body flickering with pale yellow light that Elena's cultural briefing told her indicated dismissal. "We control 600, and we are considered a minor power. The Murthani Empire spans 4,000 systems," growled General Vorath, the military commander who led their delegation. "And we earned every one through blood and conquest. What have humans earned except the right to crawl out of your caves and blink at the stars like confused animals? Laughter now, open and cruel, echoing through the crystal chamber. Elena stood her ground, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. "We do not come to compare ourselves to your great civilizations," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We come only to ask for the chance to learn, to grow, to contribute what we can to the galactic community. Surely there is room among the stars for one more voice." High Speaker Kethrix rose from his seat, his ceremonial robes flowing around him like living shadows. "And the chamber fell silent. Room among the stars," he repeated. And his compound eyes seemed to bore into Elena's soul. "Child, do you understand what you ask? Do you comprehend the responsibilities of council membership? The duties and obligations that come with recognition?" "I do," Elena said. "You do not," Kethrix replied, and his voice was cold now, stripped of amusement. "You are infants, barely able to walk, and you come before beings who have mastered the universe itself to ask for a seat at our table." He gestured with one long, chitinous arm, and images appeared in the air around Elena, showing human history in all its bloody and chaotic glory, wars and famines, genocides and disasters, the mushroom clouds of nuclear weapons and the scars of environmental destruction. "This is what you bring to us," Kethrix said. "Chaos and violence and self-destruction. Why should we allow such a species to spread its influence among the stars?" Elena wanted to argue, to point out that humanity had also created art and music and love, that they had overcome their worst impulses time and again, that their very presence here proved their capacity for growth and change. But she was not given the chance. "The petition is denied," Kethrix declared, and he waved his hand as if brushing away an insect. "Return to your little corner of the galaxy, human. Play with your 17 systems and your primitive technology. Perhaps in another 1,000 years you will be ready to speak with civilized beings." The laughter returned, louder now, and Elena felt something cold settle into her heart. She had come with hope and left with humiliation. A shuttle carrying her away from the crystal station, while the sound of alien mockery still echoed in her ears. Thomas tried to comfort her, speaking of future opportunities and diplomatic patience. But Elena barely heard him. She was composing a message in her head. 14 words that would change the course of human history when they reached the edge of human space. She transmitted it on the most secure channel available, directly to the President of the United Earth Federation and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Message was simple. They have made their choice. We will make ours. Begin Project Veil immediately. And humanity, rejected and mocked and dismissed as irrelevant, began to prepare for a future the Council could not imagine. Elena retired from diplomatic service 6 months later, her career destroyed by her failure, but she did not despair. She had seen the arrogance in their eyes, the absolute certainty that humans were beneath notice, and she knew that such pride always came before a fall. Her granddaughter was just learning to walk, a bright-eyed girl named Waylin, who would grow up in a universe that did not welcome her kind. But Elena had faith that one day the galaxy would learn to respect the species it had laughed at. And when that day came, she hoped she would live long enough to see it. 30 years passed like water flowing through a river, silent and steady, and the galaxy forgot about humanity. The Council continued its ancient business of ruling the stars, settling disputes between species, managing trade routes that spanned thousands of light years, and occasionally making war on those who refused to bow to their authority. Reports about the humans crossed the desks of intelligence officers from time to time, but they were always filed away without much interest. The primitives had stopped expanding. It seemed content to remain in their small cluster of 17 systems, presumably licking their wounds after their embarrassing rejection. They have accepted their place. High Speaker Ketherix remarked during a council session when someone mentioned the humans. As all inferior species eventually must, but the High Speaker was wrong. And his certainty would one day cost him everything he held dear, deep within the asteroid belt of the Sol system, in a facility that did not appear on any map or registry. Humanity was building something that would shake the foundations of the universe. Admiral Chen Weilin stood on the observation deck of Research Station Omega, watching through reinforced glass as the largest experiment in human history prepared for its final test. She was 62 years old now, her black hair streaked with gray, her face marked with the lines of decades spent in service to a species that refused to be forgotten. Behind there stood Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead scientist of Project Veil, a thin man with nervous hands and the brightest mind humanity had ever produced. The manifold engine is ready. Admiral, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he feared the universe itself might be listening. If our calculations are correct, we are about to change everything. Weilin nodded, but did not take her eyes from the view outside the station. Floating in the darkness between asteroids was the test ship Phantom, a small frigate crewed by volunteers who understood they might not survive the next few minutes. Explain it to me again, Weilin said. In simple terms, Dr. Webb moved to stand beside her, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. The universe we see around us is only one layer of reality, he began. Like a single page in an infinite book, our research has discovered how to slip between the pages, to exist in the space between dimensions where nothing can see us or touch us or detect us in any way. And the weapons? The Cascade warheads are even more revolutionary, Webb said, and there was something like fear in his voice. They do not destroy matter, Admiral. They erase it. They remove the target from space-time itself, leaving no trace that had ever existed. Weilin thought about her grandmother, Elena, who had died 5 years ago, still believing that humanity would one day prove itself to the galaxy. She thought about the recordings of that council session, which had been played in schools across human space to remind every child of the contempt their species had faced. She thought about the Myrthani Empire, which had recently begun making threatening noises about the human border colonies, demanding tribute and submission. Begin the test, she ordered. Dr. Webb spoke into his communicator. And outside the station, the Phantom's engines began to glow with a light that was somehow wrong, a color that human eyes could not quite process. Then the ship simply vanished, not jumped to FTO, not cloaked, not hidden behind any kind of conventional stealth technology, but truly and completely gone from the universe. Weilin held her breath, counting the seconds in her head. 30 seconds passed, then 60, then 90, and then the Phantom reappeared, exactly where it had been, its hull undamaged and its crew reporting no ill effects. It worked, Dr. Webb breathed, tears streaming down his face. It actually worked. Over the next 5 years, humanity built a fleet in secret, 300 ships equipped with manifold engines and Cascade warheads, crewed by men and women who trained in dimensions the Council did not know existed. They practiced formations that allowed them to appear from nothing, strike with weapons that could not be blocked or dodged, and vanish again before any response could be mounted. They mapped the jump points and sensor networks of every major power in the galaxy, slipping past defenses that had stood for millennia without triggering a single alarm. And they waited. The waiting ended when the Myrthani Empire, tired of human silence and seeing only weakness in their lack of expansion, decided to take what they wanted by force. General Varth, the same commander who had laughed at Ambassador Vasquez 30 years before, assembled the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet and set course for the Kepler 442 system. It was humanity's largest agricultural world, home to 16 million colonists who grew food that fed half the human population. Varth expected no resistance. and he planned to make an example of the colony to remind the humans of their proper place in the cosmic order. His fleet of 400 warships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system, their weapons armed and their troops ready for ground assault on the planet below. Colonists looked up at the darkening sky and felt despair settle into their hearts. But in the space between dimensions, Admiral Chen Weilin watched the Myrthany fleet with cold eyes and gave an order that would echo through history. All ships, engage at will. The human fleet existed everywhere and nowhere, invisible to every sensor the Myrthany possessed. And when the first Cascade warhead struck Varath's flagship, no one on either side was prepared for what happened. The kilometer-long dreadnought did not explode, it did not break apart or burn or release escape pods. It simply stopped existing, erased from reality so completely that even the light it had reflected ceased to be for a moment. The Myrthany fleet froze in confusion, their sensors showing nothing, their communications filled with panicked questions that no one could answer. Then the second ship vanished, and the third. And the fourth. Admiral Weilin watched on her displays as the enemy fleet came apart like a sandcastle before the tide. Ship after ship winking out of existence with no warning and no possibility of defense. General Varath died without ever seeing his enemy, without ever understanding what force had reached out from the void to claim him in 11 minutes. 400 Myrthany warships ceased to exist, and the colonists of Kepler 442 watched in stunned silence as their sky cleared of threats. Weilin allowed herself one small smile. Send a message to Earth, she said to her communications officer. Tell them, grandmother, we remembered, and far away, in a cemetery on Earth where Elena Vasquez lay at rest. The wind stirred the flowers on her grave, as if the universe itself was acknowledging that her faith had been rewarded. The council would learn of this disaster soon, and they would respond with more ships and more force, confident that their ancient power could crush any upstart species. They were wrong, and their education was only beginning. Humanity had been patient, humanity had been quiet, and humanity had built something in the darkness that the galaxy was not prepared to face. The Mocked had become the masters of a technology beyond comprehension, and the species that the council had dismissed as irrelevant was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The news reached the council 3 days after the third expeditionary fleet vanished from existence, carried by an automated beacon that had been programmed to flee if communications were lost. High Speaker Kethrix read the report in his private chambers, his compound eyes scanning the data again and again, as if repetition might change the impossible facts before him. 400 warships gone. General Varath, one of the most decorated commanders in Myrthany history. Gone. No distress calls, no sensor readings, no debris, no bodies. No explanation, just empty space where an invasion fleet had been. This is not possible, Kethrix said to the Myrthany ambassador who stood before him, a female warrior named Thesa, whose 4 eyes burned with rage and grief. Ships do not simply disappear, and yet they have, Thesa replied, her massive claws flexing with barely contained fury. We demand the Council's full support in responding to this act of war. High Speaker, the humans must be made to pay for this atrocity. Kethrix was old, older than most of his species ever lived, and he had seen many impossible things in his long life, but he had never felt fear quite like this. A cold uncertainty that crept into his heart and whispered that perhaps the universe was not as orderly as he had always believed. You will have your response, he told the ambassador. The 7th and 12th combined armadas will be placed under Myrthany command. 1,200 ships crewed by the finest warriors in the Empire. Thesa showed her teeth in what passed for a Myrthany smile. The humans will learn that you do not anger the bear and escape unpunished, she said, but as she left his chambers, Kethrix found himself wondering if they truly understood what they were facing. The Combined armadas assembled at the border of human space. A display of military might that would have terrified any known species in the galaxy. 1,200 warships, ranging from nimble destroyers to massive carrier vessels that could launch thousands of fighters, all armed with weapons that had crushed rebellions and conquered empires. Admiral Thissa stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Unbreakable Fury, and addressed her fleet through the communication network. "We enter human space to avenge our fallen brothers and sisters," she announced, her voice carrying to every ship in the formation. "We will find those responsible for the loss of the Third Fleet, and we will make them suffer. We will burn their worlds and enslave their people, and remind the galaxy that the Myrthani do not forget and do not forgive." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, reality bending around them as they crossed the vast distances between stars. They emerged in the outer reaches of the Kepler system, the same system where the Third Fleet had met its mysterious end for a moment. Everything was quiet. Sensors showed no enemy ships, no defensive platforms, no sign that the humans were even aware of their presence. Admiral Thissa ordered the fleet forward, spreading her ships in a search pattern designed to cover the entire system. They advanced for 12 hours without incident, and some of the younger officers began to relax, believing that the humans had fled in terror before such overwhelming force. Then, the vanishing began. The destroyer Northern Wind was the first to go, disappearing from sensors and visual contact without a trace before anyone could react. 3 more ships winked out of existence. There one moment and simply not there the next. Admiral Thissa screamed orders into her communicator, demanding information that no one could provide. And all around her the fleet began to die. Ships that had served the Myrthani Empire for centuries ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. Crews who had families waiting for them at home were erased from reality without even the mercy of a quick death. Unbreakable Fury sensors showed nothing. No enemy ships, no incoming fire, no explanation for the horror unfolding around them. What is happening? Thissa roared at her bridge crew, but they had no answers. Only fear in their eyes. The vanishing accelerated. Dozens of ships disappearing every minute now. And Thissa realized with growing dread that her fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy she could not see or fight. She ordered a retreat, but the ships that tried to jump to FTL vanished before their drives could engage. She ordered her fighters to launch, but they disappeared the moment they left their hangars. She ordered her weapons to fire in all directions, but the beams and missiles found no targets, passing through empty space where enemies should have been. In the end, Admiral Thissa stood alone on the bridge of her flagship, watching her tactical display as the last ships of the combined armadas blinked out of existence one by one. The Unbreakable Fury was the last to go, and in her final moments, Thissa saw something that would have driven her mad if she had lived long enough to process. A human ship, appearing from nowhere, hanging in space directly in front of her bridge windows. A small vessel by Myrthani standards, sleek and dark and somehow wrong, as if it did not entirely belong in normal space. A message appeared on her screen, text in the human language that her translator rendered with cold precision. "You should have been kind." Then Admiral Thissa and the Unbreakable Fury ceased to exist, and the combined armadas passed from reality into legend. Automated beacon that carried news of this disaster drifted for 6 days before reaching Council space, its memory banks containing only sensor logs that showed ships vanishing without explanation and a single human phrase that no one could understand. "Hi." Speaker Kethrix read the report in the Grand Council chamber, surrounded by representatives of the 12 ruling species, and for the first time in his long life, he had no words. 1,800 ships, the Zorani delegate said, their body flickering with colors of fear and disbelief. "Gone without a trace. How is this possible?" demanded the Vethkai military commander. "What weapon could do this? What technology could erase matter from existence? No one had answers. The Council sent investigation teams to the Kepler system. Scientists and intelligence officers, equipped with the most advanced sensors in the galaxy, they found nothing, no debris, no residual energy, no gravitational anomalies, no evidence that nearly 2,000 warships had ever existed in this region of space. It was as if the universe itself had been edited, and the Mirthany fleets had been simply deleted from the story of existence. Fear spread through the Council species like a disease, whispered in corridors and debated in emergency sessions, and felt in the hearts of beings who had never known what it meant to face something they could not understand. The humans sent no messages, made no demands, offered no explanation. They simply waited in their small cluster of systems, invisible and patient. And the galaxy began to realize that it had terribly underestimated the species it had once mocked. High Speaker Kethrix, alone in his chambers, found himself thinking about Ambassador Elena Vasquez and the hope that had shone in her eyes 30 years ago. He had laughed at her then. Secure in his ancient power and certain of human insignificance, he was not laughing now, and somewhere in the space between dimensions, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin prepared the next phase of humanity's response. Knowing that the Council had not yet begun to understand the full extent of what they faced. The vanishing had been a warning. What came next would be a reckoning. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and in all that time, they had never known true fear. They had faced rebellions and wars and natural disasters that destroyed entire worlds. But they had always emerged victorious, their power unshaken and their authority unquestioned now. For the first time, they faced something that could not be fought, could not be reasoned with, could not even be seen. And their ancient confidence began to crack. It started with the Zorani antimatter production facility in the Nexus system, a massive orbital platform that supplied fuel for a quarter of Council Space One warning. It simply was not there anymore, not destroyed, not stolen, replaced by empty vacuum as if it had never existed in the first place. The workers who would have staffed the morning shift arrived to find nothing. Their shuttle hanging in space, where a structure the size of a small city should have been. No debris, no distress signals, no explanation. The Zorani government demanded answers, and the Council had none to give. 3 days later, the Mirthany Military Academy on their homeworld vanished. This was not a space station or a remote outpost, but a massive complex built into the side of a mountain. A place where generations of warriors had trained for conquest and glory when the sun rose that morning. The mountain was simply not there anymore. In its place was a perfect hemispherical crater, smooth as glass, as if some impossible force had scooped the entire structure out of reality and left nothing behind. Panic began to spread. The High Council species had never felt helpless before, had never faced an enemy that struck without warning from directions they could not even perceive. Their fleets patrolled their own systems now, weapons charged and sensors at maximum. But they were watching for threats they could not detect and defending against attacks. They could not stop. Commanders reported seeing sensor ghosts, phantom readings that appeared and disappeared without pattern or explanation. Some crews began to fire at empty space, convinced that invisible enemies lurked just beyond their perception. Ships collided with each other in the chaos. Friendly fire incidents multiplied, and the fear only grew. High Speaker Kethrix called an emergency session of the full Council, gathering representatives from all 12 ruling species in the Grand Chamber. "We must face the truth," he said, his voice heavy with an exhaustion that came from sleepless nights and growing dread. "We are at war with an enemy we do not understand, and we are losing. Then we must negotiate," the Zorani delegate said, their body flickering with pale colors of desperation. "We must reach out to the humans and offer them whatever they want." "We tried," Kethrix replied. "We sent 3 diplomatic envoy ships to human space. All three vanished before reaching their destination. The chamber fell silent. General Threk, the new commander of the Merthany military forces, slammed his massive fist against his platform. "This is cowardice," he growled. "We hide and cower while the humans pick us apart like prey. We should gather every ship in the galaxy and crush them with overwhelming force." "With what force?" Kethrix asked. "We have lost nearly 2,000 ships without inflicting a single casualty. We have no idea how many vessels the humans possess or what their capabilities truly are. For all we know, they could destroy our entire combined fleet as easily as they destroyed the others. Then what do you suggest?" Threk demanded. "That we simply surrender, that we bow before these primitives we dismissed as irrelevant." Before Kethrix could answer, the lights in the grand chamber flickered. Every being present felt a chill run through them as the holographic projectors activated without command, displaying a single human face in the center of the room. It was Ambassador Elena Vasquez, older now than she had been in her last recording, her hair white and her face lined with age, but her eyes still sharp and her voice still strong. "Hello, Council," she said, and her tone was pleasant, almost friendly. "It has been 40 years since I stood before you and asked for partnership." The council members stared at the image, frozen between outrage and terror. "You gave us mockery," Vasquez continued. "You called us primitives and infants and told us to crawl back to our caves. So we did. We went home and we thought very carefully about the kind of galaxy we wanted to live in." She paused, and her expression hardened. 30 years ago, we asked only to be left alone. But you could not even grant us that small request. Your Merthany servants invaded our space, threatened our people, and forced us to show you what we had become." The image shifted, showing the footage of the combined armadas vanishing ship by ship. A horror that every council member had already seen 100 times in their nightmares. "You have lost 2,000 ships," Vasquez said, "but we have not taken a single life outside of military combat. We do not want to destroy you. We do not want to conquer you. We simply want you to understand something very important." The image changed again, showing real-time views of 17 council homeworlds, their capital cities and government centers clearly visible from orbit. "We are already here," Vasquez said. "Our ships have been in your systems for years, watching and waiting. We could have ended your civilizations at any time, but that was never our goal." She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look directly at High Speaker Kethrix. 40 years ago, I asked for friendship, and you laughed at me. Now I ask for nothing, and we take everything. Your antimatter facility, your military academy. These were demonstrations, proof that no place in the galaxy is beyond our reach. The hologram flickered. "You have one standard month to decide your future," Vasquez said. "Surrender unconditionally and accept human oversight of galactic governance. Or watch as your empires disappear piece by piece until nothing remains." The transmission ended, and the chamber erupted in chaos. Some delegates screamed for war. Others pleaded for surrender. Still others sat in stunned silence as their certainties crumbled around them. High Speaker Kethrix watched them all, knowing that the galaxy he had known for his entire life was ending. The humans had been patient, building their power in secret while the council grew complacent in its arrogance. They had been merciful, taking only military targets when they could have destroyed entire worlds, and they had been clever, letting fear do more damage than any weapon ever could. Kethrix thought about the young ambassador who had stood before him 4 decades ago, asking only for a chance to prove her species worthy. He had laughed at her, and now her face haunted his dreams. The month of deliberation began, and across the galaxy, the council species wrestled with a choice that was no choice at all: bow before the humans they had mocked, or face extinction at the hands of an enemy they could not see on worlds that had never known defeat. beings who had ruled the stars for millennia began to accept the impossible truth. The primitives had won, and the only question left was whether the Council would accept that defeat with grace or be erased from history, like the fleets they had sent to crush the human spirit. The month of deliberation was the longest in Council history, filled with arguments and accusations and desperate attempts to find any alternative to the impossible choice. Before them, some species wanted to fight, to gather every ship and weapon in the galaxy and launch one final assault against human space, dying with honor rather than living in submission. Others advocated for negotiation, for finding some middle ground that would preserve Council authority while satisfying human demands, and a few, the wisest and most frightened, simply waited for the inevitable High Speaker, Kethrix, listened to them all, weighing their words against the cold reality of their situation. The humans had demonstrated capabilities beyond anything the Council could match or even understand. They could appear and disappear at will, strike targets across the galaxy without warning, and erase matter from existence with weapons that left no trace. Fighting such an enemy was not courage but suicide, and the High Speaker had no intention of leading his species to extinction for the sake of pride on the 28th day. He called the final vote. The motion before us is unconditional surrender to the United Earth Federation, he announced to the assembled delegates. Those in favor indicate now, one by one. The representatives of the 12 ruling species signaled their agreements. Some did so with rage burning in their eyes, others with tears of shame. But all of them understood that survival was more important than glory. The vote was unanimous. Kethrix transmitted the surrender to human space on an open channel, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was doing. The Galactic Council of 12 accepts the terms presented by Ambassador Elena Vasquez, he said. We surrender unconditionally and await further instructions from the human government. For 3 days. There was no response. The Council species waited in agony, wondering if their surrender had been received, wondering if the humans would honor their promise of mercy, wondering if they had simply delayed their destruction by a few hours. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, the sky above every Council homeworld darkened. Ships appeared from nothing, thousands of them. Human vessels that materialized from whatever dimension they had been hiding in and took up positions in perfect formation. The fleets were not aggressive, their weapons cold and their trajectories peaceful. But their presence was a statement that could not be misunderstood. Humanity had arrived, and the old order was over. Admiral Chan Wei-Lin transported down to the Grand Council chamber, accompanied by a small honor guard of human soldiers in formal dress uniforms. She was older now, in her 70s, but she walked with the straight spine and steady step of someone who had spent a lifetime in service to something greater than herself. Kethrix met her at the entrance to the chamber, his compound eyes studying the human woman who had engineered the greatest military victory in galactic history. Admiral Wei-Lin, he said, his translator rendering his words with careful neutrality. The Council awaits your terms. Wei-Lin looked at him for a long moment, and Kethrix was surprised to see something like sadness in her eyes. Walk with me, High Speaker, she said. Before we address the Council, I want to tell you a story. They walked together through the crystal corridors of the station. The human admiral and the insectoid leader who had once ruled the galaxy 40 years ago. A young woman stood before you and asked for partnership, Wei-Lin said. She believed that humanity had something to offer the galactic community, that we could learn from your ancient wisdom and perhaps teach you something in return. I remember, Kethrix said, and his voice was heavy with regret he had never expected to feel. That woman was my grandmother, Wei-Lin continued. She died believing that humanity would one day prove itself worthy of the stars, not through conquest or violence, but through excellence and compassion. She stopped walking and turned to face the High Speaker. You destroyed her career. You know, the diplomatic corps never forgave her for the embarrassment of that day. She spent the last 30 years of her life in obscurity, watching her granddaughter rise through the military ranks and hoping that one day we would have a chance to show the galaxy who we truly are. Kethrix found that he had no words to respond. We built all of this, the ships and the weapons and the technology, not to become you, Wayland said. Not to rule through fear and force, as you have done for 10,000 years. We built it to ensure that no young species would ever face what we faced. That no ambassador would ever stand before an assembly of ancient powers and be laughed at for daring to dream. The Admiral resumed walking, and the High Speaker followed in silence. Your empires conquered and subjugated hundreds of species over the millennia. Wayland said, you treated lesser civilizations as resources to be exploited, not neighbors to be respected. That ends today.